Is the reality and the thought here that it's actually going to end up, these evictions, it's actually gonna end up impacting more Black and brown people?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at a book that Matthew Desmond wrote a few years ago called Evicted, or some of the studies that have been done in cities like Chicago, Milwaukee, Atlanta, Washington, D.C., New York City, San Francisco, overwhelmingly eviction statutes by design target Black women and indigenous women, and Latinx people tend to be next right after that. And the result of that is that you have ghettos and slums. One of the reasons that we have housing segregation today is because an eviction doesn't come off your credit ever. It's not like a bankruptcy that comes off after 7 years. And even there's this urban legend that 3 years ago, the credit reporting agencies got together and removed evictions from credit reports. But really all they did was they created a separate agency so that they could collect more money from checking a different credit report to see if someone's been evicted. And one of the interesting things about people who do work like this, like I do, who have been representing tenants, is we have been arguing for years now, if and when there is a public health crisis, and what you're going to have is, instead of evictions forcing people into slums, because slumlords are the only landlords, predatory landlords are the only landlords who will rent to people with evictions on their record. If you have any kind of public health crisis, you're not going to be putting people in slums. You're not just going to be having segregation. You will have mass homelessness. But the problem is, this is not an issue that people in power think is problematic. Because if you look at the people who push back against eviction moratoria, it's not just landlords, it's also large banks and the for-profit prisons. And the reason that for-profit prison complexes push back against this is because the leading indicator about whether a young Black man will go to prison is whether his mom was evicted. Because historically, according to the data, what will young men do if they see their mom is facing eviction? They're going to go and try and get money to get the rent paid. And so if you work for a for-profit prison, you want evictions to happen because this fuels your business. If you are a large bank, you want evictions to happen because it fuels your business. And so even where corporate landlords, even where small landlords stand to lose money as a result of this, the largest players in the economy, for the prison system, large banks, make money off of this. And that's why we haven't seen a large effort to push back against the coming eviction storm.
Wow, all right then. Oh, wow, that just blows my mind, as you do all the time. And to play devil's advocate, let's talk about these landlords. From a financial standpoint, I leverage my loans and I give out money as a bank, expecting a certain amount of return. And so if landlords don't get paid and then they can't pay their mortgage and so on and so forth, won't that be bad for the economy too?
Oh, it will be bad for the economy, but it's great for banks. And let me explain what I mean by that. If you look at how banking loans are set up for landlords, banks give out different kinds of mortgages for different kinds of borrowers. And increasingly what we're seeing in the industry is banks giving out predatory loans to landlords of color. If you remember the housing crisis, one of the things that large banks did was they preyed on the attempts of Black and brown families to build generational wealth through homeownership, through predatory loans. And now they're doing the same thing with respect to Black and brown landlords. So I have clients who I've seen where they have mortgages with an assignment of rents that requires them to pay the rent as it comes in to the bank in addition to payments. There are clauses that say that if at any point you are letting the property stay empty, you are not allowed to do that. You are not allowed to provide a rent break to your tenant, because then the bank can default you. I've seen loans where the banks put in provisions that say that because you are doing this as a rental property, you are exempting yourself from the Consumer Fraud Act, from TILA, you're waiving usury laws, and these are targeted at either areas, it's a new kind of reverse redlining, either areas of a lot of Black and brown people or Black and brown landlords. And so a lot of landlords are put in this situation, even white landlords who rent property in Black and brown areas, where they can either lose the building by not accepting, by giving their tenant a break, or they can lose the building by giving the tenant a break and the bank comes in and takes it for lack of payment. And it always goes back to these large banks. And yes, there are a lot of landlords who are refusing to work with tenants just because they are slumlords. And this goes back to what I was talking about before with the looming public health crisis. But it's also very true that banks have set this up for a while as a new way to get money, because by the time a bank has filed a foreclosure, they've usually already recovered 3 or 4 times the amount of the loan through insurance, investments, and other payments.